Gideon Rourke rode 90 miles to 4 banks in 3 days. At the last one, the clerk didn't even open his ledger. He slid Gideon's hat back across the counter, unread, like a man returning something spoiled. Gideon looked at that hat a long moment. Then he thanked the man. And he walked out straight-backed, the way his father taught him. Because a broke man who slumps is just giving them the pleasure. Inside the 5th bank, the cattleman's territorial, there were 11 men in the lobby. 11, Gideon knew every one. They'd tipped their hats to him at church and bought his steers at fair price and stood in his branding pen drinking his coffee. Now they studied their boots. Behind the polished rail sat Horace Pettibone, and Pettibone did not study his boots. He smiled. He let the whole room wait. "A name's only worth what the ledger says, Rourke," he said. "And yours reads empty." Nobody spoke. The clock on the wall knocked once, twice. 11 grown men found things to look at that were not a ruined rancher standing hat in hand. But one person in that lobby was watching him full in the face. A woman in a gray traveling coat, sitting at the writing desk by the window, a small green ledger open under her hand. She had heard every word. She had heard the 4 banks before this one in the way a woman hears the whole town without leaving her chair. She closed the little green book. Soft. And she said one word. "Wait. That's all." She said, "Wait, and I'm going to make you wait too. Because you don't yet know who she was or why one word from a moneylender's daughter would matter more than 11 silent cattlemen and a banker's smile. If you've ever watched your own name turn to nothing overnight, if you've stood in a room full of people who used to respect you and felt it drain out of you like water through sand, and if you still believe, somewhere down deep, that worth is a thing a person earns back one honest day at a time, then friend, this story is for you. Before we ride on, do me one small thing. Tap that subscribe button, because Gideon and Cordelia's story is only starting, and I don't want you to miss where it goes. And down in the comments, tell me the name of the town you're watching from tonight. Just the town. I want to see how far this story rides, how many places it reaches while 2 stubborn people learn what a name is really worth. Go on. Then come back and settle in, because we've got a valley to save. Now, let me take you back to the beginning of it. Gideon Rourke was born on Bar R ground, and he'd buried his father under the one cottonwood that grew on it. The tree stood at the top of the home pasture where the ground swelled up to catch the morning. His father had planted it as a switch 40 years back and hauled water to it by bucket through 2 droughts to keep it alive. Now it shaded a wooden marker with one word burned into it. Rourke, Gideon meant to lie there too, someday, a long way off, an old man handing the place to his own. That was the plan. Plans are cheap out here. The weather sets the real terms. 2 dry years came one behind the other. The creek that fed the low pasture went to a string of green puddles, then to cracked mud, then to nothing but a smell. Gideon watched his grass burn brown in June instead of August. He sold off the poorer cattle early to save the good ones, took a low price because everybody was selling for the same reason, and told himself next year would break the drought. Next year didn't. Then the blackleg came. If you've never seen it, count yourself lucky. It takes the young stock, the fat healthy calves, the very ones a man's counting on. They go lame first. Then down. Then they're gone in a day, sometimes 2, and there's nothing in a rancher's power to stop it once it's in the ground. Gideon lost 9 calves in the first week. He lost the vaccine to a supply house that wanted cash he no longer had. He dug the pits himself, alone, because the hired man had quit for wages Gideon couldn't meet, and he burned the carcasses the way the territory vet told him to, and he stood in the smoke and did not cry, because there was still one boy left on the place who was watching him to learn how a man takes it. The boy's name was Tobias, 14, all elbows, an orphan Gideon had taken on for board and a small wage 2 winters back. When the money went, Gideon sat him down at the kitchen table and did the sum out loud, honest, the way you'd talk to a man. There wasn't enough. There was back wages owed the boy, $11, and there was flour and coffee and a note coming due, and it didn't all fit. Gideon paid the boy first. $11, counted out in coin onto the table, before he bought a pound of his own coffee. Tobias tried to give it back. Gideon wouldn't hear it. A wage owed is a wage owed, he said. The day I keep a boy's pay to feed myself is the day I've got nothing left worth keeping. So they ate thin that month, the two of them, beans and cornbread and the last of the smoked side, and Gideon drank his coffee weak and made it last. That was the shape of the man. You want to understand everything that comes after, you hold on to that. He'd starve slow before he'd take what wasn't his, and he'd starve faster before he'd let another man go unpaid on his account. Now here is the thing they all wanted, the thing this whole story turns on, so mark it. On the high side of the Bar R, up where the rimrock broke, there was a spring. Rourke Spring. Cold, clean, and steady, the one place in the whole valley where live water came out of the ground and kept coming, drought or no drought. When the creeks died, Rourke Spring ran. When the wells down in Harrow Creek pulled up sand, Rourke Spring ran. Gideon's father used to say a man could lose everything but water and start again, and lose water and be finished with a full barn. The spring was the reason the Bar R was worth having. It was also the reason a certain man wanted it badly enough to wait for Gideon to fall. But we'll get to that man. The note was $2,400. It was held by the Cattlemen's Territorial Bank, Horace Pettibone's bank, and it had 90 days to run. 90 days. At the end of it, Gideon owed the whole sum, or the deed to the Bar R passed to the bank, the ground, the cottonwood, his father's grave, and the spring. All of it, for the price of a debt he'd taken on in a good year to buy the very calves the blackleg had just put in the ground. 90 days. That clock started ticking the morning Pettibone slid the hat back across the counter. You keep that clock in the back of your mind now, the way Gideon kept it, because it does not stop for one line of this story. So, that's the rancher. Now let me tell you about the woman who said, wait. Her name was Cordelia Merrick, and in Harrow Creek her name was a thing people said quiet. Her father was Silas Merrick. The moneylender. Not a banker. Banks have marble and clerks and the blessing of the town. A moneylender has a back office and a hard chair and a book, and he lends to the men the bank turns away, at rates the bank would blush at, and he takes a man's saddle and a widow's brooch as surety and does not lose sleep. Silas had built a fortune that way over 30 years. He'd also built a name that no amount of money had ever quite washed clean. In Harrow Creek, Merrick meant the man who'd take your last calf on a Tuesday and tip his hat to your wife on Sunday. Cordelia had grown up inside that name. She'd sat on her father's knee as a girl of 6 while he taught her figures, real figures, compound interest, and the weight of a percentage, the way another father might teach a girl her letters. She was good at it. Better than good. By 12, she could hold a column of numbers in her head and tell you where a man's ruin lay 3 payments before he saw it himself. Silas was proud of her, the way you're proud of a good tool. And somewhere in there, watching her father's trade up close, Cordelia decided she would not be that. She wouldn't take the widow's brooch. She wouldn't lend a drowning man rope by the inch and charge him for the burn. She'd taken the one thing her father had given her that was worth keeping, the head for numbers, and she'd spent 10 years turning it into something else entirely. She kept a ledger, a small one, bound in green cloth that she carried the way other women carry a Bible, and in that green ledger, in her own tight, neat hand, was written the credit of the whole territory. Not just her father's loans, everyone's. Who held what note? Who'd sold what paper to whom? Which lender was honest, and which was bleeding a man white behind a friendly face? who was 3 months from ruin and didn't know it, who could be trusted with a handshake and who needed it in ink. She'd built it a page at a time, riding the county, asking plain questions, remembering everything. It was the most complete map of money in the whole Wyoming territory, and it lived in the coat pocket of a 26-year-old woman that half the county wouldn't invite to supper. She used it to help people. Quietly, she'd find a family a fair lender when the bank said no. She'd warn a man off a partner who was underwater. She'd co-sign, front, arrange, always through paper, always at arm's length, because paper was the one language she trusted and the one thing that couldn't lie to her. That was her way, and it was also her flaw, though she didn't know it yet. Cordelia Merrick would move heaven and earth for a person, and never once say why. She'd let the ledger speak for her. And a ledger, whatever else it is, has never once said I care about you. What she wanted, the thing under everything she did, was a name. Her own. Not laundered, not bought, not her father's coin dressed in a Sunday coat. A name that meant her own honest work, that a person could say out loud in a lobby without dropping their voice. She'd spent 10 years earning it $1 and a favor at a time, and it was almost hers. That morning at the Cattleman's Territorial, she'd come in on her own errand and stayed at the writing desk to finish it. She'd heard 4 banks' worth of refusal walk in the door on Gideon Rourke's boots. She knew his note. Of course she knew his note. It was in the green ledger, $2,400, Pettibone's paper, 90 days. She knew something else too. Something small she'd jotted down not a month before and thought little of at the time. The Cattleman's Territorial had started selling paper off quiet lately, notes, debts, off the books, to a private buyer. And the private buyer was a man named Thorne. She'd written it down the way you write down weather. A fact. She had no idea yet what it meant. Neither do you, not fully. Hold it anyway. It's the seed of the whole thing. When Pettibone said his line, a name's only worth what the ledger says, Cordelia looked up from her writing, and something in her went very still and very cold. Not because it was cruel. She'd heard cruel. Because it was wrong. She knew exactly what a name was worth, down to the dollar, better than any man in that room, and she knew that Gideon Rourke's name was worth a great deal more than Horace Pettibone's ledger said. She'd watched this man for 2 years from a distance the way she watched everyone. She knew he paid his hired boy first. She knew he'd sold his good horse before his father's saddle. A man's real ledger isn't the one at the bank. It's the one written in how he acts when he's got nothing, and Gideon Rourke's read full. So she said, "Wait." And when he turned, hat in his hand, and looked at her with 2 years of pride and 3 days of humiliation in his face, she stood up, and she gathered her coat, and she walked out of the Cattleman's Territorial Bank beside the busted rancher, in front of 11 silent men, as if she had every right in the world. She caught him on the boardwalk outside. The wind had come up. It pushed grit down the street and rattled the sign over the Mercantile. "Mr. Rourke," she said, "I have a proposition, and I'd ask you to hear it before you decide what I am." He knew what she was. Everybody knew what she was. "Miss Merrick," he said, and there was courtesy in it and a wall behind the courtesy. "I've got nothing left to borrow against. If your father sent you, my father didn't send me. My father would be appalled." That was true, and something in the flat way she said it made him look at her twice. "I'm not offering you a loan. I'm offering you a partnership. A plain business arrangement, on paper, that you can read and cross out and argue over line by line. I've got no cattle to run. You've got a spring, and ground, and a note with 89 days on it, and you've got the one thing this whole town's forgotten, which is that you're a man who pays his debts." She said it briskly, like a figure she was reading off. "Here is the arrangement. I open doors your name can't. There are lenders and co-ops and supply houses in this territory that would spit on the word Rourke this week and take a note signed Merrick tomorrow. Because whatever they think of my father, they know we pay. I front your supplies. I co-sign your credit. I keep your books. You keep your outfit, your ground, your spring, your say over every head of stock and every fence line. You run the bar R. I run the paper. And I take a working share. Agreed in writing, no more, no less. Gideon stood there in the wind and looked at her a long time. Why? He said. And here is where Cordelia Merrick made the first of the mistakes that would cost her so much later, though it looked like nothing at the time. She had a true answer. The true answer was that she'd watched him for 2 years and found him to be the most honest man in a dishonest county, and that helping him meant something to her that she couldn't have named if you'd held her to the fire. But she didn't say that. She never said that. She reached for the paper answer instead, because paper was safe. Because it's a good bet, she said. Your ground and your water are worth 10 times your note in a normal year, and droughts break. A creditor who reads that in a ledger sees an opportunity. Everyone else in this town reads it in a lobby and sees a beggar. That's their loss. I intend it to be my gain. A small pause. And yours. It was a good answer. It was true as far as it went. It just wasn't the truth. And Gideon, who could smell pity at 40 yards and had spent 3 days being pitied, heard a cool woman making a cool bet, and that, of all things, was what let him say yes. Not trust. He didn't trust her. He was simply out of doors to knock on. When the last door in your life slams, you'll walk through a strange one, and you'll tell yourself it's because the terms are fair. I'll read every line, he said. I'd think less of you if you didn't. And I keep the spring. Something crossed her face then. Quick, gone. You keep the spring, Mr. Rourke. That'll be in the first line. In your hand and mine both. She put out her hand, small and ungloved, and ink stained along the side. Do we have an arrangement? He took it. Her grip was firm as a man's, and drier than he expected. We have an arrangement, he said. Neither of them knew what they'd just started. You do. You know already that there's a green ledger with more than a business share hidden inside it, that a woman who hides her heart in paper is a woman building herself a trap. That's your loop now. What's in the ledger? Carry it. The first door she opened for him was the Drovers Co-op, and it opened the way she said it would. The co-op was a low building of unpainted board on the edge of town, where the small ranchers pooled their credit to buy seed and feed and supplies at a decent price, cutting out the mercantile's markup. Gideon had been a member in good standing for 11 years. 3 weeks back they'd frozen his account. Not out of malice, the man who ran it, an old Scot named Callum Ray, liked Gideon fine. But rules were rules, and a member 3 payments behind couldn't draw. Gideon had ridden home from that particular door, feeling it close the way you feel a coffin lid. Cordelia walked in beside him and laid a single sheet of paper on Callum Ray's counter. She'd drawn it up that morning at the writing desk in the bank. That had been her errand. It was a co-signature. Her name pledged against Gideon's co-op line, up to a set figure, with the terms of repayment laid out clean. Callum Ray read it. He looked at her, and he looked at Gideon, and he did a slow sum in his head that had nothing to do with numbers. Then he did the numbers too, because he was a careful man. Merrick paper was Merrick paper. Whatever a man thought of the trade paid on the day it said it would. He'd never once been stung by a Merrick note. You understand what you're standing surety for, Miss Merrick, he said. Not unkind, just fair. Better than you do, Mr. Ray, she said. I understand it to the penny. He signed. Just like that, a door that had shut in Gideon's face swung open, seed credit, feed on account, a line to buy what he needed to hold the herd through the dry weeks and keep the surviving stock alive. Gideon carried out a sack of the vaccine he'd been unable to buy while his calves died, and he had to stop on the boardwalk and stand a moment. Because a man doesn't like to be seen the way that made him feel. Cordelia was already walking to the horses, giving him the moment, pretending to check a cinch. She'd learned that much about pride. Give a proud man his privacy, and he'll forgive you for saving him. That was the first proof. One door. It moved something between them by exactly 1 degree, though neither would have said so. Then she came out to the bar R, and that's where the real trouble started, because you can co-sign a note from across a counter, but you can't keep a man's books from town. She had to be there. So she was there. She came out in a wagon with a lockbox and that green ledger and a hard resolve to be strictly professional, and she set up at his kitchen table. The same table where he'd counted $11 into a boy's hands, and she began to make sense of the wreck of his accounts. Gideon rose before light and mended the fence the drought and the dead stock hauling had wrecked, and he came in at dark smelling of dust and sweat, and there she'd be, in the lamplight, turning his shoebox of receipts into columns. They did not get along at first, understand that. This was no soft thing. He resented needing her and covered it with cold courtesy. She resented being resented for helping and covered it with cold efficiency. They were two proud, wounded people in a small kitchen, and the air between them could have struck a match. "You've been paying the mercantile 8% over the co-op price for 2 years," she said one evening, not looking up. "Out of loyalty, I suppose. That loyalty cost you $110 you didn't have." Emmett at the mercantile carried me through the winter of the hard freeze when the co-op wouldn't, and charged you for it every month since. She made a note. "Sentiment is a luxury, Miss Rourke. You can't afford it just now." "Then I reckon I'm poorer than you thought," he said, "because I'm not selling it." She did look up then. And she didn't have an answer, because he'd said, in 6 words, the exact thing she believed and would never admit, that some things a person keeps aren't in the ledger, and that a man who'd sell them to balance a column has already lost more than money. She wrote nothing. She looked back down, and a second degree moved, quiet, under the argument. The small things started then. The things you don't count until later. She noticed he never sat to eat until Tobias had a full plate. Every night. The boy first, always, and if there wasn't quite enough, it was Gideon's portion that got thin, never the boy's. She noticed he did it without a word, without wanting it seen, the way you do a thing that's simply who you are. She wrote that in no ledger. But she kept it. And he noticed her too, though he'd have denied it under oath. He noticed. She read. Late, when the books were done, she'd take down his father's Bible from the shelf, the big one, the family one, and she didn't read the scripture. She read the flyleaf, the front page where 4 generations of Rourkes were written in fading ink, births, marriages, deaths, his father's hand and his grandfather's before that, and at the bottom, in Gideon's own careful letters, the date he'd buried the old man under the cottonwood. She read that flyleaf like it was the most interesting document in the house, and Gideon, watching from the doorway, understood something he couldn't have put words to, that a woman who'd give anything for a name of her own would look longest at a family's proof that its name had meant something for 100 years. He said nothing. He let her read. That was his gift to her, the same as the privacy on the boardwalk had been hers to him. 2 people learning to be kind in the only currency they trusted, silence and space, and the things left unsaid. But there was a shadow moving over all of it, and it had a name. On the 3rd morning she was there, they found a paper nailed to the gatepost. A clean sheet, a fair hand, weighted with a stone against the wind. It was an offer to buy. For Rourke Spring and the ground around it, a sum that was more than fair, which was the whole menace of it, because no honest man overpays for water in a drought unless he means to own the valley. It was signed August Thorne. Gideon read it and put it in the stove. "You should keep it," Cordelia said quietly. "Even to refuse." "That's a man who, I know what that man is." She looked at him. "Do you?" she said. Not a challenge, a real question. Because she knew something about August Thorne that Gideon didn't, something with the shape of a warning, and she was deciding whether to say it. Thorne was the private buyer. Thorne was the man quietly buying paper off the Cattlemen's Territorial Bank. She'd written it in the green ledger a month ago and thought little of it. Standing in Gideon's kitchen with Thorne's offer curling to ash in the stove, she thought a great deal of it, all at once, and the pieces began to slide toward each other in her mind the way numbers do when a fraud is about to show itself. She didn't say it yet. She wasn't sure yet, and Cordelia Merrick did not speak until the paper said she was right. That caution was going to cost them too, but that's later. August Thorne was a cattle baron, and more than that, a land speculator, and more than that, a patient man, which is the most dangerous thing a greedy man can be. He wore his arrogance in the open, the way some men wear a good coat. He didn't want the bar R for its grass. He wanted the spring. In a valley dying of thirst, whoever held the live water held every neighbor's throat, and Thorne meant to hold it. He was buying notes. Quietly, the neighboring places, the small outfits along the dry creek, their debts one by one, off the bank's books at a discount, so that when the drought squeezed hard enough he could call them all at once and foreclose a whole valley into his hand, and dry them out, and buy them cheap, and control every drop from the rimrock to the railhead. Gideon's spring was the keystone. With it, Thorne owned the water. Without it, Gideon was just one more small man to be starved off his ground. Gideon knew Thorne wanted the spring. He did not yet know Thorne owned half his neighbors already. He did not know how close the net had drawn. But you're starting to see it, aren't you? You're starting to see the shape of the thing settling down over the whole valley, while a rancher mends fence, and a woman keeps his books, and the pair of them argue about the mercantile's markup and don't say the true things out loud. Now the story turns hard, and I want you standing in the room for it. Because this is the wound, the rest of it will spend itself healing. Cordelia decided they needed Gideon's full file from the Cattlemen's Territorial. The whole history of the note, every clause, every assignment, every stamp on the back of the paper. She had a reason she didn't fully explain. She wanted to see whether Gideon's note had been touched, whether it too had been quietly sold, or marked, or moved. If Thorne was buying paper off Pettibone, she needed to know if Gideon's was in the pile, so she took Gideon back into the bank to pull it. They walked in together. The same lobby, the same 11 men, or near enough, cattlemen doing their business, men who'd looked away once already, and would look away again. And there, behind the polished rail, Horace Pettibone, who had had a week to enjoy the story of the busted rancher, and now watched the busted rancher come back through his door with the moneylender's daughter at his side, and something in Pettibone's small, careful soul curdled at the sight of it. Cordelia stated her business plain. She was co-signer of record on Mr. Rourke's co-op credit and his authorized bookkeeper, and she wished to review his complete file on the $2,400 note, which was her right and his. Pettibone let the lobby go quiet. He was good at that. He let the quiet stretch until every man in the room had stopped his own business to watch. His file, Pettibone said. He said it like the word amused him. Miss Merrick, this bank keeps its files for its account holders and their agents of standing. Mr. Rourke's standing is a matter of record. He turned to Gideon, and he smiled the smile from the week before, the one that had slid a hat back across a counter. A name's only worth what the ledger says, Rourke, and yours reads empty. He'd said it before. He said it again, knowing it would land twice as hard for being an echo, in the same room, before the same men. It was a cruelty designed and aimed. Gideon took it standing. He'd had a week to build the wall higher, and it held, though the cost of holding it showed white around his mouth. Then, Pettibone turned to Cordelia, and he did the thing that made it monstrous. And as for you. He looked her up and down, the gray coat, the ink-stained hand, the small green book she carried. Your father's money spends anywhere. I'll grant him that. But you, Miss Merrick, your name buys nothing here but talk. You may co-sign for beggars at the co-op if it pleases you. In this bank, a Merrick's word is worth precisely what a Rourke's is now. He let it sit, which is to say, nothing. Good day. The lobby did not gasp. That was the worst of it. The lobby agreed. 11 men who'd have taken her father's loan on a hard winter, who'd have tipped their hats to Gideon in a fat year, stood in silence and let a banker rule that neither of these two people was worth the paper their names were written on. The clock knocked. Somebody coughed. And that was the sound of a whole town's respect, worth exactly nothing, filling a marble room. They didn't get the file. There was nothing to do but leave, and they left, and it is a hard thing to walk out of a room slow when everything in you wants to run. Outside, the wind again. It was always windy on that street. Gideon didn't say anything. Neither did she, for a moment. And then Cordelia Merrick, who had heard herself weighed and found worthless in front of the whole town, the exact thing she'd spent 10 years working never to hear, did not weep and did not rage. She opened the small green ledger to a fresh page. Her hands were not quite steady. And she began, then and there on the boardwalk, to write. "What are you doing?" Gideon said. His voice was rough. "My job," she said. And her voice was steady, which cost her more than his roughness cost him. He wouldn't give us the file. Fine. There's more than one way to read a man's paper. I'm going to build it myself, from the outside, from every source in this county, and when I'm done I'll know more about that note and that bank than Horace Pettibone knows about his own vault. She looked up at him, and her eyes were bright and hard, and there was a whole grief behind them she would not let out. He thinks a name buys nothing. Mr. Rourke, I have spent my whole life learning exactly what a name is worth. He's about to find out that mine, worthless as he says it is, can read his ledger through the wall, and that, right there, that moment on the windy boardwalk, two people wearing the same wound in front of the same 11 men, that is where this stops being a story about a busted rancher taking charity and starts being something else. Because he heard her. He heard the steel in it and the grief under the steel, and for the first time Gideon Rourke looked at the moneylender's daughter and did not see his father's enemy or a cool woman making a cool bet. He saw someone who'd just been robbed of the same thing he'd been robbed of, standing up out of the dirt to earn it back a page at a time. He didn't say anything. He wasn't a man of speeches, but he took the green ledger from her hands, gentle, and held it while she pulled on her gloves against the cold, and then he gave it back, and that was all. And it was everything. Now the clock was down to 70 some days. The herd was thin. Thorne's net was drawing tight around a valley that didn't yet know it was caught. And two people who'd sworn this was only paper had just made each other a promise on a boardwalk without a single word. A promise the whole rest of this story is going to test to breaking. Because I haven't told you the worst of it. There's a thing in that green ledger, coming, that neither of them can see yet. A line with Gideon's own name on it. A truth about who owns his note and his water and his father's grave, hidden in Cordelia Merrick's tight, neat hand, waiting, and when he finds it, and he will find it, everything you've just watched them build is going to look, to a proud man, like a cage. But that's still to come. For now, hold this, the drought's not done with them, Thorne's not done with them, and the two hardest nights of Gideon Rourke's life are waiting for him up at the spring, in the dark, with the last of the blackleg and a woman who won't leave. Wait for it. The morning it happened. Silas Merrick came to the boarding house before the sun was full up. He found his daughter at the little writing desk by the window, the green ledger open, her pen already moving. He did not sit. He set his hat on the bed and stood over her the way a man stands over a debt he means to call. "You'll stop this," he said. Today, Cordelia did not look up. "Good morning, Father." Elliot Pettibone is a patient man, but patience has a floor. His father and I have an understanding. The wedding stands the family up straight in this territory. Legitimate, clean. He tapped the desk with one finger. And you are out at a busted man's kitchen table keeping his books like a hired girl. Do you know what they call you in the street? I know what they called me before, she said. It was the same word, and it was yours. That landed. She watched it land. Silas Merrick had built 30 years of fortune on other men's ruin, and the one thing he could not abide was hearing his own trade named plain by the child he'd taught it to. He'll drown, Silas said. Quieter now, meaner. The Rourke place is a hole in the ground. Thorne wants the water, and Thorne gets what he wants. Marry Elliot. Be a banker's wife. Sleep warm. She capped the pen. She stood, and she put on her coat, and she took the green ledger under her arm. You always taught me a note is only worth the name behind it, she said. I'm going to go find out what mine's worth. Then she walked past her father and out the door. The Drovers' Bank was full that morning. It was co-op day, and half the valley was in from the range, men in from Callum Ray's outfit, riders down from the north pastures, wives with their egg money. Tobias in the doorway with mud to his knees because Gideon had sent him for nails. Gideon himself was at the counter, hat in hand, trying to talk Callum Ray into 30 more days of feed on credit. His voice was low. His neck was red. A proud man asking is a hard thing to watch, and the room was watching. Cordelia came in on the cold air, and everyone turned. She did not go to Gideon. She went to the counter beside him, laid the green ledger down, and opened it to a clean page. Mr. Ray, she said, loud enough for the back wall. I want to put my own line against Gideon Rourke's note, the whole of it. $2,400, held at Cattleman's Territorial, due in the count of days you all know. I'll pledge my personal credit as surety. Written, witnessed. Today, the room went dead still. Callum Ray, old Scot, careful, set both hands flat on his counter. Miss Merrick. That's your name on a drowning man's paper. I can read a ledger better than any man in this territory, she said. Better than my father. I don't stake what won't stand. I'm staking this. Gideon had gone white. Cordelia, it's already done, she said, not looking at him, because if she looked at him she'd lose the steel and she needed the steel. Sign it, Mr. Ray, or I'll ride to the railhead bank and shame you for a coward. Callum Ray looked at her a long moment. Then, something in the old man's weathered face gave way, not to her money, but to her nerve. He turned the book. He dipped the pen. He signed as witness, and slid it for her hand, and Cordelia Merrick wrote her name under Gideon Rourke's like it was the most natural thing in the world. The murmur ran through the room like water finding a crack. And in the doorway, unseen by both of them, Elliot Pettibone stood with his good hat in his hands and watched the woman he was promised choose another man in front of the whole valley. He didn't shout. He wasn't that kind. He just put his hat on and turned and went out into the street, and that was the last anyone saw of the merger of Merrick money and bank respectability, dying quiet in a doorway on co-op day. Outside, Gideon caught her arm on the boardwalk. You had no right, he said. His voice shook. That's your name. You're 10 years. You just hung it on a corpse. It's not a corpse yet. She pulled her arm free, gentle. And it's my name. Mine to hang where I please. You don't get a say in that, Gideon. That's the one thing in this arrangement that's mine. He stared at her. Behind them, through the window, the town was still murmuring, and somewhere in that murmur was the sound of the ice between two proud people cracking clean down the middle. Why? He said. Not a question. A man at the end of his understanding. But she didn't answer. She just settled the green ledger under her arm and said, We've got a herd to save, and days to do it in. Get the boy. Let's go home. The storm came 4 nights later. It came the way summer storms come to that country. Nothing. Nothing. And then a black wall standing up out of the west, with lightning walking under it. Cordelia had driven her wagon down to the railhead for the last of the winter feed and was 2 miles out on the flat when the sky opened. The wash below the Bar R gate ran dry 300 days of the year. It did not run dry that night. It came down off the rimrock in a brown roar, and it took the wagon wheels, and it took the mare's footing, and Cordelia Merrick found herself standing on the seat of a tilting wagon in the dark, with water climbing the spokes and the lockbox and the green ledger clutched against her chest. Gideon heard the mare scream from the home pasture. He didn't think. He was on his horse bareback and into the black before Tobias could get the barn door open. He came down the washbank at a slide, water to his stirrups, and he saw her white face in a lightning flash, and he did the only thing there was. "Give me your hand." "The feed." "Leave the feed." "Give me your hand, Cordelia, now." She let go of everything but the ledger. She reached. He caught her wrist and pulled, and she came off the wagon seat into the water and against his chest, and for 1 second in the roar and the rain there was nothing between them at all. Her hand flat on his heart, his arm crushed around her back, her face turned up into his in the dark, both of them breathing hard, both of them a half-inch from the one thing neither had let themselves want. Then the mare lunged for the bank and broke it, and the moment broke with it. He got her up out of the wash. He got the mare cut loose. The wagon and the feed went down the flood and were gone, and neither of them said a word about the feed. They stood on the high bank in the rain, soaked through, and Gideon put his coat over her shoulders, though it was as wet as she was, and she let him. And that was the second time in this story a thing passed between them that no word touched. "You could have drowned for a wagon of hay," he said finally. "You could have drowned for me," she said. He didn't have an answer to that. He walked her up to the house instead, his hand at the small of her back the whole way, and neither of them mentioned it, and both of them felt it. And up at the top of the home pasture, the cottonwood tossed in the wind over a wooden marker burned with the name Rourke, and the rain his father never got fell all night long. The feed was gone. The clock kept running. And they were still short. That was when Gideon Rourke did the thing that saved the herd and near broke his body doing it. He looked at his thin cattle and his empty barn and the calendar on the wall, and he said the word he'd been swallowing for a month. "We drive." They would gather every animal on the Bar R that could walk, cut the fat ones, and push them the hard 40 miles to the railhead to sell. Not the whole herd. Never the whole herd. A man doesn't eat his seed corn, but enough. Enough to put real money against the note. Callum Ray lent 2 riders. Tobias rode point like a man, though he was 14. Cordelia rode drag in the dust with the green ledger buttoned under her slicker, and she did not complain once, and when a rider made a remark about a moneylender's daughter eating cattle dust for a busted rancher, Gideon rode back through the whole herd to tell the man to shut his mouth. And the man shut it. 3 days on the trail. Cold camps. A steer down in a badger hole they had to shoot. Cordelia's soft hands gone to blisters, and then to callus. And on the 3rd night, at the fire, Gideon looked across at her wrapping her own hands in strips of shirt cloth, and he said the thing. "You've got no reason to be out here." "I've got the best reason there is," she said, and left it there. They made the railhead. They sold. The count came in, $110 a head over what he'd feared, 8% over the co-op price, because Cordelia knew the buyer's book better than the buyer did, and told Gideon to hold 2 hours past the first offer. When the drover paid out, Gideon stood there with the money in his fist and did the arithmetic against his note, and his jaw worked. Short. Still short. A few $100s short with the days near run out. But close. God, close. Close enough to hope. And here is the thing you know that Gideon did not. The thing the flood and the drive and the blisters had hidden from him. That night at the Railhead Hotel, Cordelia sat up late over the green ledger by a guttering candle, and she turned to a page near the back, and she ran her finger down a column and stopped. There was a line there. There was a name there. It was his name, and it was $2,400, and the notation beside it did not read Cattleman's Territorial Bank. It read paid in full, and then a date 3 months gone, and then, in her own tight hand, one word. Mine. She closed the book fast, as if closing it could keep it a while longer. Down the hall, a proud man slept easy for the first time in 90 days, thinking he'd nearly clawed his way free on his own 2 hands. And he had. That was the cruelty of it. He'd earned every dollar. He just didn't own the debt he thought he was earning against, because it wasn't at the bank anymore. And it hadn't been for 3 months, and the person who held his water and his father's grave and his whole future was sleeping 4 doors down, with the proof buttoned under her slicker. August Thorne found him the next morning, before Cordelia woke. Gideon was at the livery, saddling for the ride home, when the big man came down the aisle in a good coat with 2 riders behind him. Thorne did not raise his voice. Thorne never raised his voice. That was the frightening thing about him. "Rourke, heard you made a nice sale." He leaned on the stall post. "Heard you're going to run up to Cattleman's Territorial and pay off old Pettibone with it. That's my business." "It is. It is your business." Thorne smiled, slow. "Only there's a thing you don't know. And I'd be a poor neighbor to let you ride all that way a fool. Your note's not at the bank, son. Hasn't been for 3 months. Pettibone sold it. Off the books. The way he's been selling half this valley to me." Gideon went still with the cinch in his hand. "You're lying." "Am I? Ask yourself who'd buy a busted man's paper." Thorne's smile widened, and here he set the hook, and he set it deep. "You've been dancing for the moneylender's girl 3 months, Rourke, writing storms for her, eating dust for her. And she's held your paper the whole while. Bought it herself. It's in that little green book she carries everywhere like a Bible. Go on. Ask her to show you. Ask her whose name's on your note." And then Thorne tipped his hat, and walked out, and left the poison to work. It worked. Gideon rode back into the yard at the Railhead Hotel, and he did not knock. He came into the room where Cordelia was folding her coat, and he crossed to the writing table where the green ledger lay, and she saw his face, and she knew. "Gideon, show me the book." "Let me tell you, show me the book, Cordelia." She didn't stop him. That was the worst of it. She never once tried to stop him. She just went pale, and let her hands fall, and Gideon Rourke turned the green ledger to the back and ran his eye down the pages until he found it. His own name. The $2,400. The date 3 months gone. And the one word in her small, clean hand. Mine. The silence in that room went on a long time. 3 months, he said at last. Quiet, that was the terrible part, he was quiet. 3 months you owned it. Before the drive. Before the storm. Before the co-op. You already had my note in your pocket when you stood up at Ray's counter and made that show. His voice didn't rise. It just went flat and cold and far away. It was never a partnership. I was never a partner. I was a note you were collecting. And the collateral, his jaw worked, the collateral was the spring. My father's water. You wanted what Thorne wants. You just wore a kinder coat to come and take it. That is not true. She stood up out of her chair. Gideon, that is not what this is. Then what is it? And here was where Cordelia Merrick, who could read every man's book but could never say her own heart out loud, who hid every feeling she had behind a page of paper, here was where she opened her mouth to tell him the truth. That she'd bought his note with her own 10 years of earned money to keep Thorne from ever foreclosing the spring out from under him. That she'd done it before she even knew she loved him and had spent 3 months afraid to say so, and she couldn't. The words wouldn't come. They never came for her. She'd built a whole life out of not needing them. So what came out instead was, "It's business." It's protected. You're protected. And it was the exact wrong word, and she knew it the instant it left her, and she watched it hit him like the flat of a hand. Protected, he said. Like a fool. Like a charity case. Like a busted man who couldn't hold his own ground, so a Merrick had to buy it out from under him to be kind. He set the ledger down. Gentle. The way he'd once held it gentle on a boardwalk, and the memory of that gentleness was in the room, and it made this unbearable. I'll pay you back every dollar. The sale money, the co-op, all of it. And you'll have your note. And I'll have my hands clean of the both of you. Gideon, please, but a proud man doesn't hear please. A proud man hears pity. He picked up his hat, and he thanked her. God help her. He thanked her, the same straight-backed way he'd thanked the clerk who slid his hat back unread. Because that was the only way he knew how to be broken, and he walked out, and he rode for the Bar R alone with the drive money in his saddlebag, short a few $100, days on the clock, to try and buy back a note that wasn't even at the bank he was riding to. Redemption Day came up hard and bright. It came the way the worst days come, clear and beautiful, no mercy in the weather. Gideon rode into Harrow Creek with everything he had scraped and sold and borrowed clean, the drive money, the last of the herd cut and sold, Tobias's returned wages the boy had pressed on him, and Gideon had wept over in the barn and taken, because there was no pride left to refuse with. It made a stack. It did not make $2,400. It made a little more than $2,000, and the land office clock on the wall said he had until noon. The room filled. They came the way people come to a hanging, the same 11 cattlemen who'd looked away in the bank lobby. Callum Ray. Hat off. Tobias White faced by the door. Horace Pettibone in his good black coat, smug as a cat, standing beside August Thorne, who had brought a bank draft for the full note amount and a smile that had already spent the water. And near the window, apart, Silas Merrick, and beside her father, in her gray traveling coat Cordelia, she had not spoken to Gideon in 6 days. The land agent, a nervous man named Hollis, called it to order. This is the redemption of the note against the Bar R, $2,400. Or, the deed passes to the current holder at the stroke of 12. Mr. Rourke, can you make the sum? Gideon set his money on the counter. All of it. Every dollar of 2 dry years and 3 hard nights, and a boy's returned wages. That's what I've got, he said. It's what I could earn. It's short. It's short, Pettibone agreed, pleased. Thorne stepped up smooth and laid his bank draft down beside Gideon's little stack, and it was for the full amount and more, and he said, "Then I'll redeem it, agent. I hold the equivalent interest. The deed to me." And Hollis looked from the money to the draft to the clock, and Gideon Rourke stood there with his whole life $200 short and his father's grave about to change hands, straight-backed, saying nothing, taking it the only way he knew. "No," said Cordelia Merrick. She came away from the window. She had the green ledger under her arm, and something else in her other hand, a folded paper, cream-colored, official. She walked the length of that room through the murmur and the turned heads, and she laid the folded paper on the counter in front of the agent, over both the money and the draft. "That note," she said, "is not held by Cattleman's Territorial Bank. And it is not held by August Thorne. It hasn't been for 3 months." She unfolded the paper. "It's held by me. I bought it. Here's the assignment, signed by Horace Pettibone's own hand, dated the 9th of the month, 3 months gone, for the full $2,400. Paid out of my personal account at the Railhead Bank. My money, not my father's. 10 years of my own earned money." The room made a sound like wind. Gideon turned and looked at her and could not speak. "He'll tell you I did it for the spring," she went on, and her voice was steady now, steady the way it had never been in a private room. Because Cordelia Merrick could only ever say the truth in front of a crowd where it counted as testimony and not as feeling. He'll tell you I did it to own him. I'll tell you the truth instead, since I couldn't tell it to his face and it near cost us everything. I bought his note the day after I watched that man, she pointed at Pettibone, call his name empty in front of 11 men who used to tip their hats to him. I bought it so that no bank and no baron could ever put Gideon Rourke's father's grave up on a counter again. I didn't do it as a lender. I did it as, and here the steel cracked, just once, just for a breath, as the one person in this territory who saw what he was worth when the ledger said nothing. That's all. That's the whole scheme. Then she took up the agent's pen, and across the face of the note that held Gideon Rourke's land and water and his father's ground, she wrote, in her tight, clean hand, one word. Paid. Sign the deed back to him. Mr. Hollis, free and clear. Rourke to Rourke. And keep his money? No. Give him back his money. He earned it honest, and he'll want it for cattle. The room broke into noise. August Thorne did not break. Thorne stepped forward and put a heavy hand on the counter over the deed. This is a fraud. A woman's trick. That note was pledged to my interest, was it? Cordelia opened the green ledger. She did not raise her voice. She had never once, in this whole story, raised her voice, and she didn't start now. Let's read your interests, Mr. Thorne, since we're all here. The Barcross note. Your quiet purchase off Mr. Pettibone in April, foreclosed dry, family gone to Cheyenne. The Delaney place. Same. 2 crooked liens I filed copies of with the territorial recorder 3 weeks ago. Because a lien that fences a common water is against the water law of this territory. And you knew it. And you did it anyway. She turned a page. And here's yours. Your own paper, Mr. Thorne. You leveraged everything you own against a drought that would break this valley to you. But the valley didn't break. And your notes come due in 30 days, and I've filed to have them called, and I know the men who hold them. Because I know every note in this territory, that's the whole of what I am. She looked up. You bought a drought, sir. It's over. The runoff's coming. Thorne's face went the color of ash. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. And Callum Ray and 2 of the cattlemen who'd found their spines that morning walked him to the door, one at each arm, and put August Thorne out into the street, and the valley's water stayed common, and that was the end of him in Harrow Creek. Then the room turned to Horace Pettibone. He was already reaching for his hat. Cordelia's finger came down on one more line. The assignment I hold, she said, is signed by you, Mr. Pettibone, off your own books. You sold this man's paper to me and half this valley's paper to Thorne for a fee off the ledger, while you called honest men empty to their faces. It's all here. In writing. In your hand. She closed the green book. You said a name's only worth what the ledger says. Here's what yours says now. Nobody walked Pettibone out. That was worse. The 11 cattlemen just looked at him. Really looked at him. The way they'd looked away from Gideon, and one by one they turned their backs, and Horace Pettibone put on his good black hat and walked out of that land office into a town that would let him count his own money for the rest of his life and never again trust him with theirs. And Silas Merrick stood by the window and watched his daughter, watched the moneylender's name, the whispered name, the name he'd spent 30 years trying to launder respectable through a banker's son, become, in the space of 10 minutes, the cleanest and most feared and most honest name in the room. He had come to that office to push her one last time toward Elliot and the sensible exit. He watched the sensible exit walk out the door 6 days early. And the push died in his throat, and Silas Merrick, for the first time in his life, looked at his daughter with something that wasn't calculation. It was close to awe. That left Gideon. He hadn't moved. The deed to the Bar lay on the counter with his own name on it, free and clear, and the money he'd bled for beside it. And the woman who'd done it standing there, with a closed green book and 6 days of his silence between them, and every eye in Harrow Creek on the two of them. "You should have told me," he said. "I don't know how to tell things," she said. "I only know how to keep them in a book." "That's my whole failing, Gideon. You lead with your pride, and I hide behind my paper, and we near lost the both of us to it." She pushed the deed an inch toward him. "Take your land. It was always yours." "I never wanted an inch of it. I only wanted," and she stopped, because the words still wouldn't come. Even now, even here. So Gideon Rourke, who did not make speeches, made the only one of his life. He did not pick up the deed. "I won't take it as charity," he said. And the whole room held its breath because it sounded like a refusal, and then he kept going. "And I won't take it as a debt I owe you. There's only one way I'll take a thing like this from a woman like you." He came around the counter. He was rough and thin and dust-colored, and his hands shook. Partners. Real ones. Not paper. Not a share. Name beside name. He looked at the green ledger in her hands, the book that held the whole territory, and he put his hand over it, over hers. "Put it on the door, Cordelia, Rourke and Merrick, both. Put us in that book together, and let's keep the honest account of this whole valley from the same kitchen table till we're old. Stay and build it with me." Cordelia Merrick, who had never once in this story raised her voice or shown her heart or found the words, opened her mouth to answer, and found, at last, that she didn't need any. She kissed him. On the steps of the land office in the hard bright noon, in front of the 11 cattlemen and Callum Ray and Tobias whooping like the boy he was, and Silas Merrick standing very still by the window. She took Gideon Rourke's dust-colored face in her blistered hands and kissed him, and the whole town of Harrow Creek witnessed it, and the green ledger was pressed between them, and neither of them let it fall. Now let me tell you how it went. A year on. Because a story like this, you've earned the after. The spring came back. 2 dry years broke that autumn, and the rimrock let go, and Rourke Spring ran loud enough across the home pasture that you could hear it from the porch, live water, in a drought country, running through any dry year that would ever come, exactly as Gideon's father had always said it would. The bar R filled up green. The herd came back a calf at a time, and up at the top of the home pasture, under the one cottonwood, the wooden marker burned with the name Rourke stood in grass instead of dust, and the water his father never got ran past it every single day. There's a new brand iron hanging by the barn door now. It reads a joined mark, an R and an M grown into one shape, and Tobias, 15 now and grown a hand taller, is the one who swings it. Because Gideon taught him the outfit the way a father teaches a son, board and wage and all. The green ledger still sits open on the same kitchen table, only now it's kept in 2 hands. Cordelia keeps the figures, and Gideon keeps the cattle, and between them they keep the honest account of half the valley. Because when a family gets in trouble in that country now, they don't ride to a bank. They ride to the bar R, where a Merrick will read the paper straight and a Rourke will tell them the truth, and no honest man has been called empty in Harrow Creek since. They married under the cottonwood on the porch, with the spring loud below and the whole valley up the hill, and Silas Merrick signed the guest book. He signed it Merrick, just Merrick, and for the first time in 30 years the name read like an honest thing, and he stood a long while by his daughter's father's grave and said nothing, which for Silas Merrick was a kind of prayer. As for the others, August Thorne's notes came due and were called, every one, and he sold up and moved his cattle to drier ground, alone, chasing a drought somewhere else to buy. Horace Pettibone still counts money at Cattleman's Territorial, his own. No one in that valley has let him count theirs since. And Elliot Pettibone married a girl from Cheyenne who never once made him ride into a storm, and by all accounts he's content, which is the most that duty ever promised him. Here's what I want you to hold, at the end of it. A name can go to nothing overnight. Gideon Rourke watched his slide across a counter unread. But it comes back the only way worth having, not handed down, not laundered clean, not bought, earned back. $1 and a day, and one honest act at a time, until the ledger reads what you always knew you were worth. That's the whole account. The spring's still running, the book's still open, and there's 2 names on the door. If you rode all this way with Gideon and Cordelia, do me one small thing before you go. Comment the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far their story rides.